Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the AusCannaPodcast. I'm your host, Christina McMullen, and today's episode is a special one. I've got an exciting guest joining us, Liz Warburton, a qualified naturopath with a rich history in the cannabis world as a consumer, dispensary manager, and now cannabis consultant and educator. This episode is a little unique because it's an on-the-road episode, but with a twist. Liz traveled up the range to visit me here on the Darling Downs in Toowoomba for the famous Carnival of Flowers. We spent the day strolling through the botanical gardens at Queen's Park, then made our way down Campbell Street to the Baker's Duck, a popular local bakery, to grab a delicious treat before finding a cozy spot back in the park to sit and have a great conversation. Since we're sitting outside in the park, you might hear some background noises, birds chirping, people passing by, and even a helicopter making a cheeky appearance. But that's all part of the charm of this special on-the-road episode, and I think it adds to the experience. Now, before we dive into today's conversation, a quick reminder to keep sending in your rapid-fire questions. If your question gets picked for the show, you'll win an exclusive AusCanna sticker pack. So don't be shy. Submit your questions for a chance to be featured on an upcoming episode. All right. Whether you're a patient, a healthcare provider, or someone just curious about the ever-evolving world of medicinal cannabis, this episode is packed with insights you won't want to miss. Let's jump right in.
You ready, Liz?
As ready as I'll ever be.
All right, here we go. What's your favorite way to consume cannabis?
This is pretty on brand. My favorite way to consume cannabis is through concentrates.
Morning person or night owl?
I prefer to get up in the mornings, but I tend to stay awake more at night.
What's your go-to coffee or tea order?
I'm getting really into matcha lattes at the moment because I like the sustained release kind of caffeine, but otherwise I just do a cold drip coffee because that's also a bit more sustained release.
I like it.
What I was looking for.
I like a good matcha latte.
Oh,
yummy.
So good. And I can pretend that it's, all those antioxidants are helping me not age. So, it's comfort.
It's all in how we spin it to ourselves, right?
Exactly.
Totally. Do you prefer working from home or the office?
I probably prefer an office if it's a big team environment. I really like being around a lot of people and kind of having people to bounce off of during the day. But I do enjoy having the occasional day to work from home. I'm all about balance.
Got a balanced life, right?
Yeah, that's it.
All right. So I have a listener question from Jamie in Melbourne.
Hopeful.
Who's the best Dr. Seuss character?
Oh boy. I feel like this is a matter of opinion. I'm a big fan of the Cat in the Hat. He loves to cause trouble and create chaos, and I'm all about chaos. I actually have a tattoo on the back of my neck that says chaos. So I think it's pretty on brand.
It is. It's very on brand. Very on brand. I like it. I'm more of a Yertle the turtle, only because I feel like all of the Dr. Seuss characters kind of you learn a lesson with.
Yeah.
And Yertle is kind of like the only one that's still an asshole at the end.
I love that. Maybe I should be more into him.
Like I said, he's
Staying true to who he is. That's important.
He is. He's adorable in his own little sense. Yertle the turtle. What's one thing you can't start your day without?
A walk in the morning. I need my walkies and my sunshine. Otherwise, I go a little bit house crazy. Just like, your dog will start chewing furniture and things like that. That's me. I mean, I don't chew furniture, but in my own human way, I do the equivalent.
Good deal. What's your favorite book or podcast right now?
My favorite book is a good one. This is my eternally favorite book. It's called Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. I have a tattoo of Marcus Aurelius on the back of my arm to kind of remind me of all the lessons that are in the book. But it's essentially a stoicism book, and it's basically about, serving your community, not complaining, taking things on with a calm and, as calm as I am. I need that reminder all the time. So it's just about, not complaining and being good to your community, I suppose, is one of the best ways I can sum it up. But it's a lot more than that, and I'd highly recommend anyone read it. Most people I know who read it once a year.
Oh,
just to keep on top of kind of what it's saying. Yeah,
Bring
it
it
can
back
be quite dense. It's basically the diary of I think it's 1600s Roman emperor or something like that. So it can get a little bit heavy. And because there's so much in it, sometimes you miss things, and then it's like you'll have one line in the book that just hits hard, really, really hard for you. So it's kind of one of those ones that you reread it, and where you are in life, you'll get a different kind of lesson out of it each time.
That's a book I started reading and put down.
Like I said, it can get pretty dense, and there's actually different versions of it. I've found there's a lot more heavy version where you kind of sit there on a sentence, and you're like, what are you even saying, dude? But then there's like translated versions that kind of try to make it a little bit more digestible. And I would highly recommend those. I'll see if I can find you a copy.
Okay, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah.
Because I'm pretty sure I must have read a more, like, it was a heady, I do remember having moments where I was like, what the fuck did I just read?
Yeah, it's definitely like, there have been times where I've spent like 30 minutes on a single page trying to actually digest what it's saying. And then that was when I put that one down, if I'm being honest with you. But,
okay. So
yeah. It's definitely version dependent because I lose my books all the time. So I've bought Meditations probably like 4 times now, and I've had people gift it to me a few times as well. And yeah, so there's definitely different versions. There are versions where even I was like, I can't do this, but there's a version that's a lot easier to read and more digestible. So
I like it. I just got to keep looking for the right version.
No, I'll get you one. I'll get you one, Christina. I've done the vetting.
I like it. Like it. You're like, don't worry, I got you covered, girl. Got you covered. All right. What's your favorite meal to cook?
I will be honest, I am not much of a cook. I'm getting better at it, actually. I recently hung out with a guy who's like got trained in French cuisine, and he kind of taught me the simplicity of ingredients and things like that. So just like, just pairing it like a good, tomato with like some nice goat's cheese or something else. Like, I just like that simple stuff, if I'm being honest with you. Anything too complicated I kind of get to in my head about, but the really simple, good ingredients, that's kind of where I've started to go with my cooking, to be honest.
I like it though, because you're right. Good ingredients, it can be simple and it's delicious.
Absolutely.
It doesn't have to be flashy.
Absolutely. Don't overthink it is what I'm learning, because that's definitely what I did with cooking.
What was the very first cannabis strain you tried?
Well, I mean, I was in the black market before I was in the medical market, so unfortunately I wouldn't know anything in that regard. But the first product I ever had in Australia was a Cannatrek product called T20 Mongolian. So that was one of their first flowers. I'm not sure I could tell you exactly what the cultivar is, if I'm being honest with you.
I was just saying, I've never heard of that one.
Yeah. No, it's real old. I think they discontinued it early 21 or something like that. But that was my first one. And to be honest with you, I do. And there's a sentimental aspect of that particular container for me, because I remember walking out with it and just being like, oh my God, I don't have to look over my shoulder anymore. I'm allowed to have this. Like, this is insane. I'm so excited. And it, compared to what I'd had on the street, especially at that time, it was amazing. Like, I'm sure if I tried it now, I'd probably be like, this is okay. This is really average, But at the time, it was everything. It was amazing, because it was the best I'd had at the time. So now I'm spoiled for choice, which, has given me high standards that might be too high. I don't know. But yeah, at the time, I still think of like the shape of the container, because they actually don't have that shape anymore. It was like it was a bit more wide and a lot shorter. And yeah, it was interesting. Those are the days. Oh,
look at you. Oh, back in the heyday.
Yeah. Again, I don't think it was the flower that I loved the most. It was just the fact that I was like, this is legal and I'm allowed to have it. I don't have to be panicked anymore when I smoke. Yeah, sometimes it is the nostalgia that makes something a little bit better than what it is. Yeah,
Sure.
especially when it comes to things like cannabis and, you know.
It's that memory that goes with it that you're like,
Yes.
all right, so last question. What's your favorite thing about running your own business?
I think just being a free agent, to be honest, to be able to kind of stick to my morals and not worry about, the commercials of another company and having to, generate business. And like, I understand that every company needs to generate sales, but it's not really, I guess, my priority. It's not what lights up my soul. What lights up my soul is kind of telling people about cannabis and educating them and helping out patients. And that's why I loved pharmacy so much, is because I got to actually talk to patients and kind of help them out and things like that. So just having my own agency and not feeling pressured to kind of breach my own morals because of I'm getting a paycheck and this is how I survive, and being able to do it my way in my own weird way. It's just really nice. It's really nice. And being able to have my own brand and not have my reputation tied to the actions of a certain company, because we all know what it's like. So it's just really nice to be able to be myself and be myself wholly and truly and be able to make money doing that. I've been really, really blessed.
That vibes with me so much, man. I 100% get that. So Liz, for the listeners who don't know anything about you, do you mind just kind of giving us a brief little background as to who you are?
Of course. So my cannabis journey started when I was a teenager. I've been using cannabis to help with really severe insomnia for pretty much my entire life, sometimes to my own detriment. But I studied naturopathy because I always wanted to do medicine, but my experience with kind of the biomedical sphere, and don't get me wrong, it absolutely has its place and it has saved lives. It just wasn't my way of helping people. And I remember looking through, like my friends were all graduating and I was looking through all these different subjects I could go for uni and just none of them were hitting home. And then I discovered naturopathy, and obviously I was already a big fan of weed, and I was like, this kind of, goes into what I'm used to and what I like. So, and it was just really interesting. There was a lot of history, but anyway, that's a long way to say that I'm a naturopath as well. And then I started working at a Brisbane compounding pharmacy in 2020, and we didn't do cannabis in the beginning. We were just a compounding pharmacy, and I was helping with the nutraceutical compounding and formulation, and that was so much fun. I got to play in a lab and play with formulations. It was the best thing ever. And then I was kind of the operations manager there for a little while, and then I was the product manager. So then I was kind of dealing with companies, with the accounts and kind of the inventory, dealing with complaints and the product stuff. And because when our pharmacy started, our pharmacists weren't, quite on top of cannabis. So I was kind of the girl that they were putting on the phone for adverse events or any questions that were like, outside of the realm of pharmacy. I was the person, and then I would always train any new staff that came in as well. I remember every time we had new staff come in, I would sit there and tell them what is cannabis, what's an indica, what's a sativa, how do you do this, and what's the difference between a full spectrum oil and blah, blah, blah. Because all of that's actually really, really important to actually doing this right. And so then I ended up leaving that company in 2023, and I worked for Sadivite for a little while as the general manager of customer care. And that was where I really got an idea of quality and the legacy behind cannabis and what makes a good quality flower and what doesn't, and also kind of more those 2.0 products, like they were the first ones to release live resin. And that's a whole other story, but that's where I discovered my love for live resin and concentrates. And then in January of this year, I just kind of decided to go out on my own and start my own company. And I'm a sole trader, but not anymore. And I just wanted to kind of focus on education and, like I said, focus on doing what I thought was important in this industry. I feel like we still have a lot of work to do as far as the cannabis industry goes. And I just wanted to connect the right people. I wanted to put good people in a room together because I have quite a large network. And I just wanted to be able to do what kind of lights up my soul. So that's what I decided to do. And again, it's been such a journey, but it was really, really nice to see how well I was received. And the beautiful part now is I've got a business partner. So we actually are a company now. We're a big boy business. So the company is called Nativa Education and Consulting. So we basically help people who are entering into market to kind of navigate the market. We have some international clients, but the big part is we do education. So we did a pharmacy education on Saturday, 9 hours, going through everything you need to know about cannabis. And I tell you what, my brain was really, really sore at the end. So that's who I am. I'm sure there's a bit more to it, but I feel like that was a very long way to say it anyway. So that's me.
Well, there's a lot of information there. You've had an interesting life, to say the very least. Let's start maybe with, I guess, maybe some of the challenges that you might have started having at Brisbane at Compounding Pharmacy, because I guess that would be kind of like your first kind of foot into dealing with patients and adverse effects, and then teaching, educating the new people that are coming in.
Yeah.
And you said it was 2020, right?
Yeah. The end of 2020 is when we started taking cannabis. So September 2020. I remember the first script pile that we got, and I was just calling every single patient on the phone, be like, hey, you want your cannabis? Hey, you want your cannabis? Hey, you want your cannabis? It was awesome.
So I was going to say, what was that like? Because 2020, that was pretty early. You guys were one of the earlier pharmacies?
We were one of the earlier pharmacies, and we were, this could be contentious, but I think we were one of the first high volume pharmacies as well. I think one of the biggest challenges was dealing with cannabis patients can be quite difficult. A lot of us are dysregulated, and I say that as someone who's dysregulated myself. And we can get pretty upset when we don't have cannabis. And a lot of people who are coming in from the cannabis, turning into the medicinal market, don't really deal with pharmacies a lot. So sometimes they don't understand the little things about pharmacy, that sometimes you have to order things in. It's a bit more than putting a label on a sticker. These are Schedule A controlled medications that are heavily guarded by the government, and et cetera, et cetera. So that could be a bit of a challenge, especially with keeping staff, because a lot of staff have trouble with people who can be abusive and things like that. But to be honest with you, I think we turned our greatest challenge into one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. So one thing that I'm a massive advocate for, and this is what I try to teach pharmacies, is when you manage cannabis patients, is you've got to understand that, in my opinion, nobody's an asshole for fun. Some people are, don't get me wrong, but when you're talking about especially cannabis people,
I think that bird's being an asshole for fun.
Yeah, the birds are assholes for fun. That's a different category of people. But I find most of the time people were either just really anxious, or they weren't, sure of what to do, or they were going without their medication, so they were freaking out. And I think it's really important that we understand that as healthcare practitioners, it's our job to look after these people regardless. We're the adult in the room. At no point should we ever worry about our own safety because of this sort of thing. But I used to, every time I hired staff back in the day, I would kind of go through this little spiel, like, when you talk to these cannabis patients, they're going to be some of the best people you'll ever deal with and some of the worst people you'll ever deal with. First and foremostly, I want you to understand that if they're screaming at you, it has absolutely nothing to do with you. It doesn't make sense that it has anything to do with you. So first of all, please just put that wall up and understand that it's not you. This is just a person who needs help, and you're there to help them. And the idea is like, it's not us against them. It's both of us against their mental health. This person is struggling with something, and it's up to us to help them as healthcare practitioners. So while it was one of the most challenging things ever, I remember the main clinic that we were doing scripts for literally said to us that we send our most difficult patients to you, to give people a haven, like people who had been rejected by other pharmacies or treated like crap by other pharmacies, to give them a haven where they were actually treated like a human being. And, we had staff on board that were happy to deal with people with mental health issues and things like that. It was, to this day, it's still one of the most rewarding experiences of my life, to understand that, people that other people might look as difficult or whatever else is just someone going through their own stuff. And to be honest with you, most of the time when you showed them kindness, the response you would get from these people was almost heartbreaking, because what I thought was a small kindness, was almost life-changing to them. And they're just like, oh my God, thank you so much. No one's ever done that for me, and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, it was nice to give people a home, I know that sounds so weird, but it was nice to have a nice pharmacy where, yes, there was chaos everywhere, but I love chaos, as we know, but it was a friendly chaos.
No, but you're right, though, to have a place where, it sounds a little scary when they're like, we're sending you all of our complicated people.
Yeah.
That does sound scary, but everybody needs a place. And you're right, I've worked hospitality for many, many years, and you develop a thick skin no matter what it is.
I've hired a lot of people from hospitality.
Yeah, you just have to remind yourself time and time again, it's not you.
It can't be.
It's not.
It doesn't make any sense to
didn't do anything wrong in that situation. Somebody else is just having a bad day.
Yeah, you don't know what's going on.
Like what you're saying, somebody just needs some help.
Yeah.
And again, back in 2020, we all needed a lot of help.
It was a very clunky system too. It was very clunky. I remember when we had product-specific approvals. So your TGA approval now is under categories. I think that came out November 21, I believe. Like, yeah, it would have been 21. Whereas before that, it was like you would get a specific product and then you would have to get the approval for it. And then if, say, it went out of stock, which a lot of, like, we would have patients who just got their approval, just sent it to us, and we were like, it's out of stock for the next 2 months, because there was a lot less brands and their supply chain it was still very clunky. And so we had stuff that would go out of stock for 2 months at a time. And it was like, wow, sorry, you've got to get a new approval, which meant another consult, and they had to then pay for the consult, and it wasn't their fault. And it was very clunky back in the day. I'm not saying it's completely smooth now, but they've definitely made some changes that have been helpful.
What would you say was the best change they've made?
The category system.
The category.
Sure. that was an absolute nightmare.
So for a patient that doesn't understand that at all, how do you explain? When you're saying categories, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So because cannabis is an unapproved medicine, so it is not TGA approved, which means you have to go through the SASB system or the AP system. So approved is stuff on the ARTG that has gone through clinical trials, etc. As far as Australia is concerned, we don't have as much evidence for that here. So basically when a doctor writes a prescription for cannabis, they have to apply to the TGA to then be able to prescribe that. So the category system is basically the approvals, like I said, used to be product-based, and now they're based on categories. So 1 is, for example, 98% CBD, and then 2, it goes in varying degrees. So 3 is a balanced product for anywhere between 40 to 60% on CBD and THC, and then category 4 leans more towards THC, and then THC is 98%, category 5, sorry, is 98% THC. So it's basically just varying levels of CBD and THC, and then there's some minor cannabinoid stuff in there as well, but we won't go too deep into it. So now the categories, so most flowers are a category 5 flower, because as far as even though it's a 20%, it's not 98% THC. As far as the cannabinoids that are listed, it's more THC than anything else.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah,
hopefully. So like a 1010 oil would be a category 3 oral oil. Most flowers fall under the category 5, some fall under the category 4. Yeah, it's just based on how much THC and CBD is in the product, essentially.
Okay, and so as a patient, we're getting approved based off of those kind of categories.
Correct. So if you have, say, a category 5 approval as a doctor, you can't then prescribe balanced flowers unless you go and get that approval as well.
Oh, see, that's something that I think a lot of people probably don't realize, that you would think to yourself, oh, well, I've got a category 5, which means I can have all this THC. So it means I can have
surely
anything.
I can have a balanced product.
Yeah, right? I can have anything else, right?
Not
and so you're saying like, no, like, you literally have to have an approval for each kind of category.
Correct. And each dosage form. So if you want to be able to prescribe, say, pastilles, and everyone runs into that, you have to get a new approval for that. If you want to do topicals, a new approval for that. Yeah. So it's based on the category and the dosage form.
See, I didn't know. I learned something.
There we go.
Thank you.
Well, as much as I can demystify this for patients as I can is going to be a good thing, because I think that's some of the issues that we face is the patients don't quite understand what the back end looks like, and it can be quite complicated.
Yeah, I mean, look, from my perspective as a patient, I mean, I do. I look for my flowers. I make my list, if you will, and then I have my appointment, and I'm like, okay, well, this is what I want. Yeah. Can we make this happen? And truth is, I don't really know that much about like behind the scenes. I mean, I get my script sent to me, and then I call my pharmacy and I'm like, hey guys, I'd like to have this, this, and this. And they're either like, oh, we have it here, you can come in this afternoon, or oh, we have to order it, we'll need a day or a couple of days.
Yeah.
And I guess that's something that maybe patients don't understand. Where like the logistics behind the supply chain, they're not all, like all of these products are not all sitting in one warehouse waiting to get shipped out to pharmacies, are they?
Absolutely not. So another thing that people need to remember is that because these are Schedule A controlled medications, you have to have a safe that meets certain specifications, et cetera, et cetera. And most pharmacies have a couple of small safes because, there's, a couple of essays like oxycodone, a couple of other things, dexamphetamine, blah, blah, blah. And those are very small containers. You don't need to hold a lot of it. It's not very high volume. So, 1 or 2 safes, sometimes even 1 is just enough for a pharmacy. Whereas if you're doing cannabis, most of the pharmacies that I deal with, if they're trying to get into cannabis, I'm like, you need a vault. You need a vault to do this. You've got like 1,300 SKUs on the market now, and most patients want stuff in stock right now. And I think that's where BCP, again, was really, really good, is that we tended to have stock quite often. So you need a vault if you want to hold everything in the country, even if it's just a couple of units. The cannabis, plastic jars are much bigger than anything you'll see in pharmacy. There's even massive boxes now. It can get pretty heavy. So when patients get upset that this isn't in stock, just be aware that there's a very heavy investment that goes into holding that stock. And there's also, the fact that you're not going to be able to hold everything in stock all the time. It's just not possible. This doesn't just go on a shelf in the back of your pharmacy. This is something you have to invest time and money into, and a lot of space in your pharmacy. And some people don't have space in their pharmacy to be able to do this. So it's just another thing for patients to be aware of. They're not trying to not keep it in stock. They just have very minimal space, I promise.
Which makes sense, right? Because you're right. Like, as you're saying it, this is not something that's coming in like a flat pack box that's like pill pack.
It's a couple of centimeters long.
No, yeah, that it's, you can literally have 1,000 pills sitting on the shelf.
Absolutely.
It takes up a couple of, little nook in the corner. No, like 4 tubs and that's your whole corner, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. There's a very small amount of cannabis you can keep in a single safe. And a lot of these pharmacies are also still trying to function, doing the rest of their medications as well. So adding cannabis into your pharmacy is absolutely a process, and it takes a while.
So let's talk concentrates, because I feel like you've got a special love for concentrates.
I do.
I'm a flower girl, and I say it all the time. I like touching my flower. There's something therapeutic about actually touching the flower, and I feel that concentrates are a little bit removed from that.
Correct.
But perhaps on some level it's because I don't understand them as much as I should, right? And so I think that's one of the reasons why I was so excited when you said that you were willing to come on the podcast, because I'm like, oh, Liz is going to teach me some stuff. And maybe I'm going to look at concentrates in a whole new light.
Yeah, well, look, that's what I'm trying to do with concentrates, because everybody kind of looks at it as the crack of weed, and everyone thinks of, those people everyone pictures the people partying with massive dabs that are like 2 centimeters long and they're getting messed up, and that's not what concentrates are fundamentally about medically. I mean, I know that's probably why they were created.
I'll put my hand up, because that's literally my first experience with it. I don't remember what show or who I was talking to, but that is my first experience with it. Literally in somebody's kitchen in Vancouver, and it's like the banger and the blowtorch, and it's like, and I literally did have a moment where I stood back and I was like, holy fuck, I have never felt like a druggie consuming cannabis in my life, ever. But right here in this moment, standing in this kitchen, I feel so tapped into crackhead lifestyle, like I grew up with Whitney saying, crack is whack, and here I am. I'm like
getting light torches out so that I can use weed. Yeah, it's very intense. It's very intense.
So, again, I think this is why I was so excited to have you on the show, because that's, again, hand up, that's me. That's my first experience with it. That's my only real experience with it. I mean, I've done some vape cartridges and whatnot, but again, none of it was refined or sophisticated. Yeah, it was all druggy.
Yeah, it's definitely, to be honest, it's what I thought back in the day. I remember, this is embarrassing now and I'm not proud of it, but I remember when the first hash product came out on the market, I was like, oh, it's just for junkies, and why does anyone need that much THC? And they're like an idiot. But what really got me onto concentrates, in all honesty, was when I was at Sativite in that live resin, when I tried the live resin for the first time. I remember saying to the guys as soon as I had it, I was like, I'm a live resin girl now. I don't need anything else. This is the best thing I've ever had in my life. And the main reason why I love concentrates so much is because I have been kind of smoking and doing a number on my lungs since I was very young. And it's definitely starting to show as I get into my older age. But I got COVID, I think a couple of times over the last few years. I didn't test too many times. I just stayed home for a week or two. But I got some really bad respiratory infections the last couple years. And it got to a point where smoking flower was just so painful for me. Like, it's funny, whenever I'm in circles with cannabis people and they like hand me joints and stuff like that, I'll smoke it. And they always give me crap because I'm coughing my lungs out. And everyone thinks I'm supposed to be this tough cannabis girl who's been smoking for over a decade. And I'm like, but that's why my lungs hate me. Like, that's why I can't do this. Like,
you're like, it took me a decade to get this cough.
Yeah, exactly. My lungs they're done with me, man. I don't. And when you're coughing that much and it becomes painful and your eyes are watering, it's not relaxing for me. It's not fun for me. It doesn't feel good. I get congestion the next morning. I'm coughing up a lung the next morning. Like, I've gotten abs from my coughing fits many times. And I just don't get that with concentrates at all. You do have to be kind of strategic in the way that you inhale. You don't inhale it like you would smoking. It's kind of more like a sipping tea and like a deep breath. I'm talking about specifically the vapes. It's obviously a little bit different when you're talking Popcos and dab rigs and stuff. But it doesn't hurt as much. It's just a lot cleaner. I found that I was able to kind of take some during the day, and I can take smaller amounts. I'm not sitting on my vape for 30 minutes getting way too high and unable to function. I can just take a little bit here, a little bit there. Oh, I'm a little bit overwhelmed here, sip on my vape a little bit, and I can move on from there. So that's what really kind of started driving my love for concentrates. And then, so I've pretty much been on vapes mostly this year, if I'm being honest. And then I went to Canada recently, and this is a fun little story. I was in Montreal and I was walking home from a business meeting, and because I'm clumsy as heck and they have the cobblestone road there, like the French fashion, I tripped on a piece of cobblestone, and it was in the middle of a construction zone, and I ended up taking a chunk out of my hand. You can see this, but the listeners can't, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's a good little cut.
It's probably about like a 10 to 20 cent size piece out of my hand, and I couldn't use my hand for a few weeks, and I took even more skin off my knee, and like the guys I was with had to actually carry me home. I don't think I ate enough that day, and I was starting to go into shock. Like, I remember jumping up after, because I was so embarrassed after falling over in front of a group of people. I just jumped up and I was like, I'm fine. And then someone looked at my hand, they're like, Liz, you're not fine, because I had like heaps of blood dripping from my hand. And I was like, oh no, I'm probably not fine. Anyway, we get back to our Airbnb, and like while they're doing first aid on me, I'm crying like a baby. I'm screaming and squealing, and I'm not usually like that, to be honest with you. But yeah, I was going into shock. I was sweating, I was shaking, I was not okay in any sense of the word. And I just looked at my friend and I was like, because he was showing me these previously, the previous couple of days, I was like, do you have any of that live rosin? Because I was like, I'm in so much pain right now. And he pulls it out. I have one hit off a Puffco. And I tell you what, it was such an experience. Like, all my pain went away immediately. My nervous system calmed down immediately. I wasn't shaking anymore. I just remember having the dab and like kind of like being like, oh, that was really good. I'm like, thank you guys so much for like looking after me tonight. Just went real from like crazy crying girl to like, oh, that was really nice. Okay, well, I think I'm going to go to bed now. I had one of the best sleeps of my life, if I'm being honest with you. And I woke up feeling I still wasn't in pain when I woke up. It wasn't until later on in the day when I had to redress my wound that I started to be like, this is not good. But it just kind of made me realize how effective they can be. And like, I can promise you, as someone who's been smoking flower for most of my life, I wouldn't have gotten the same effects. I've never felt anything like that in my life. And it just made me think about, like, if you're a chronic pain patient, to have it just completely disappear is something else. So it gives people a little bit more room to kind of get that stronger hit that they need without consuming as much. And for someone with lung issues, again, it's just kind of a double plus for me.
That makes sense though, right? Because again, you're using less.
Yeah. And this is the misconception, is a lot of people think that it means that people are going to use more. But I mean, I would never recommend a 1 or 2 centimeter, size dab at any one moment. Like the starting dose that I tell people to take is basically the size of a pinprick, because this is a lot more potent. But the reality is, I have a friend of mine who knows Bubble Man, the guy who termed the coin bubble hash. I think it was 1996 or something like that. I believe his name's Marcus. And I kind of asked him what his maximum, or how much he would consume in a day, right? And this is obviously someone who's been cultivating smoking, doing all this for a very, very long time. You would expect a pretty high amount. And he gets to about 1 gram a day, which is, give or take. Generally, they're about 800 milligrams of THC per gram. So if you're really doing the math on that, it's about 4 grams of a 20% flower. And for someone who's been smoking for decades to be happy with that amount, it kind of showed me that just because you can do more doesn't mean you will. And this is another thing about concentrates, is everybody thinks they're tough when it comes to weed, but if you overdose on a concentrate, it's not fun. Nobody enjoys that. You're vomiting in a toilet, or you're dizzy, or you're not feeling like, nobody's doing that for fun. So concentrates are actually not the worst way to stop people from going overboard all the time, because you can keep consuming flower and have nothing happen. Whereas if you think you're really tough with concentrates, give it a go, guys. It's not fun. I've done it myself.
Like I said, let's go back to that kitchen in Vancouver, right? Like
it's not pleasant when it's too much.
God, I look back on my friends that were in that room and I'm like, gosh, you guys were a bunch of schmucks. Like, how come nobody told me? Like, I was hitting that thing. Like, we were doing rips off a bucket, off of a bong. I was like, let's do it. Like, I didn't know.
Yeah.
I was dumb.
Yeah.
And again, I'm pointing fingers at friends. But that is the only time I've ever, quote unquote, greened out, because we were supposed to go for, what was it, Chinese food, I think. And I was like, nope, I'm going to sit right here. And they're like, no, come on, we're going to go. And I'm like, no, because I'm cool. I'm here. I'm all right. Like, I'm not dying. I'm not freaking out, but I am not leaving this kitchen to go and get Chinese food.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I was okay in the grand scheme of things, but it
wasn't comfortable. I remember the first time we talked about it, you're like, yeah, I've done it once. I didn't really like it. And I'm like, and that's a lot of people's experience who had way too much. And that's why I think it's actually almost a clever way of dosing people, because you can't abuse it. And if you do, it's really not pleasant. A really small amount of concentrates are phenomenal. You can't underestimate it. It's really good stuff when you do it in small concentrations. And look, there are going to always be people that take too much, and maybe it's not for them. And, not every type of cannabis is for everyone. Let's be real.
Yep. Okay.
But for the people like myself who can't handle flower, and for lung reasons, because of my biology, it's a really good way for me to be able to still get my medicine in the way I was always used to, without getting the same negative effects.
So to just circle back there on, how much you would take and whatnot, how would you kind of coach a patient that doesn't know anything about it? Like, how do I consume it? What do I do with it? Because there are some, like, what is it now coming out? We've got the diamonds, and we've got diamonds in sauce now. And we're, okay, so, because I look at diamonds and I'm like, how do you, again, like, Whitney in the back of my head going, crack is what?
Oh, to be fair, diamonds do look like crack rocks when you don't mix them with terms, because they're actual diamonds.
They do. They look like it. And like I said, I hear Whitney in the back of my head. So, again, what do I do with that?
Yeah. So there's various little tools and tricks and things that you can do with concentrates. At the moment, with the way the device legislation is going and banning vapes and things like that, it's a little bit harder to find devices that are for concentrates. But most of your run-of-the-mill herbal vaporizers, I know the Mighty does it, have like concentrate pads or little concentrate things. And most of us have been ignoring those for the last few years. I'm hoping that some people kept them.
I have some. They're literally in the little plastic thing that came in the, I have some, but I was like,
those little like metal scourer thingies that look like
scrub
mini scrub brushes. Yeah, that's for concentrates.
The first time I used it, I tried to put this is a funny story, I tried to sprinkle my Heyday CBG keef on it. I was like, oh, this will work. It kind of did. It kind of,
yeah. Well, to be fair, that's what I would try.
Right? Like, that was my first attempt with, I was like, this is totally what it's for. No, it works better with the right
direction for sure. Because
flower sandwich.
Keef is kind of a concentrate. It's just a little bit different. It's better to sandwich things like that and hash, but with the concentrates where it's like wax or honey. Yeah. So look, you can buy a hot knife. So it's a knife that heats up so that you can easily cut through it and use it. Otherwise, it's just like most of your Mighties or anything come with like a little spatula, like a metal spatula. So you just essentially scoop a little bit out. And again, I would always start with a pinprick. For people with experience, you can go a little bit higher than that, but you're never going to be using too much of it, if I'm being honest. So I always say start with a pinprick, and then with everything with cannabis, you'll figure out what works for you. You'll figure out what dose is good for you, but just start with that pinprick so that you don't accidentally overdose yourself, because it is going to be a bit more. I don't think too many people with cannabis experience are going to overdose themselves on a pinprick, but everybody's different.
Everyone's different.
And again, it's about starting there, seeing how you feel. And if you want a little bit more, go another pinprick. That's totally fine. And then eventually you'll be able to kind of go up.
Is there a temperature that we should be at?
So you can do the 210 temperature that the Mighty has. Most of your electronic dab rigs, so just to be clear, I do not under any circumstances recommend using a dab rig that requires a torch. I'm just going to pause.
Nothing like ambiance doing a podcast.
Love it.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, sorry. So just to be clear, I do not recommend under any circumstances using the dab rigs with a blowtorch. Some people are fine with them. I personally don't consider them very safe. The electronic dab rigs are what you want to be using, same as an electronic vaporizer. And those, so Puffco's a really good example. They're kind of the gold standard. They can go anywhere between 400 and 500 degrees, I believe. So I don't generally recommend going up to those really, really high temperatures because especially when you have terpenes involved, they can turn into substances that are not good for you at those temperatures. So they can give you headaches. It can do long-term damage. You know, obviously the heat behind it is not great for your lungs regardless. But if you need breakthrough pain help, sometimes the higher temperatures are what you have to reach to get there. It just depends on the person. But especially anything full spectrum, which is what I believe most concentrates on the market are, I'd recommend the lower temperature, like 450 maximum. But again, it's one of those things where it's kind of look at who you are as a person, what you prefer, et cetera, et cetera. I always go low temperatures, especially if there's a higher terp profile, just because you also get like the better taste.
I was going to say
the profile a bit better. So yeah, low for live resin for sure. But other ones, yeah, it really depends on the person. I wish there was an exact science on what the perfect temperature is for what, but it's just, we're not there yet, unfortunately. We're still dealing with the stigma of concentrates to begin with.
Okay, so with the stigma of concentrates, how do you educate the healthcare professionals so they prescribe it? Because do they look at it? I mean, because again, flour, we had to overcome the hurdle there to even start getting flour, and now we're hopping into concentrates. How are you, because you're doing consulting now, so how do you navigate those conversations with doctors?
First and foremostly, I think a lot of doctors are not super comfortable with prescribing herbs to begin with. And again, I'll start with saying that I have nothing against flower, but from a pharmaceutical point of view, we don't smoke flower. We don't smoke opium flowers. We don't smoke digitalis. We don't smoke, you know, we extract them, make them stronger and play with them in a way that makes most sense to us medically. And that's exactly what extracts are. So I've heard the term that cannabis is like a dirty glass of water and extracts are a clean glass of water. So if you want your patient to have, if they're going to long-term be using this medicine, it's actually better to be using a pure product that's not going to be damaging their lung tissue, right? The other side of it is, as I said, in my opinion, it's a more pharmaceutical product. It's exactly what we've done with other pharmaceuticals. And just because people in the legacy market are the ones who started it, doesn't mean pharmaceuticals can't finish it in a way that works for us. It's the best way, it's cleaner, it's the best way to get the exact potency that you want to get out of it. And it means that you can formulate and add other minor cannabinoids and say a higher amount or a lower amount or whatever you want to do to play with it to get the exact same product every single time. Everyone who knows cannabis knows that the stability, like yes, THC and CBD can be more stable, but we all know that the terpenes, the minor cannabinoids, all of that is important as well. So once your flower has gotten to a certain age, whether it's in date or not, it's not going to have the same effects that it did when it was first pulled. With extracts, you mitigate that because they're a lot more stable. Friends of mine have COAs of stability of some terpenes within a variation of 2% for 2 years. That's crazy for a volatile substance.
Yeah, that is.
And we all know that monoterpenes are really important for the effects of these things. So being able to give your patient a consistent product that you know is stable and is not going to be breaking down while it's on the shelf is a big win, in my opinion. It means that you can say, okay, this product isn't for the patient. Like I know a lot of patients track batches and batches of cannabis and go, well, this batch is better than that batch. That should not happen with medication. That doesn't make sense to happen with medication.
True. It's so true. It is so true though, because you see the posts on Reddit where they're like, no, like, you need this batch, and you need to talk to your pharmacist to find out, well, what batch do they have?
That's not how medicine should work.
No, you don't want that batch. You want, and you're right. Yeah. That's not how medicine should work.
And it's not that anyone's being nefarious. It's not anybody's fault that cannabis varies each time you grow it. It's a natural substance. This is what you get with natural substances. But this is also why pharmaceuticals have opted to turn those substances into something more stable so that you get more consistent results.
Do you think we'll see a split in the sense that Australia moves towards adult use, but pharmaceuticals, they kind of let go of the flower and they focus in on the concentrate? Like kind of an extension of what you're saying, right? Because it is, right? And I 100% agree with you. flower does break down like nobody's business. The second you open that tub and things are released and blah, 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 it does. And I do believe, I mean, I'm not doing COAs. I haven't seen those COAs, but I do believe that a concentrate does stay in that form. I mean,
and it's contained.
Yeah,
it's a lot more stable because
exactly.
it's in a more waxy substance rather than spread across, plant matter and things like that.
Exactly.
It means you're also not smoking, fats, waxes, chlorophyll, things like that.
So do you think, let's imagine, if you will, is that something that would be feasible? Would that be something that you would be like, yes, I think this is the best idea?
I would be super, super into that idea, to be honest. Because I know people love their flower, and I'm not here to take it away from anyone. I used to love it a lot. I just physically can't handle it as much anymore. That would make sense to make that a bit more on the recreational side, and then to have concentrates, because obviously I understand there's concerns with high THC, to still be under a doctor. And I think like Australia has a really unique, we're the first ones to actually integrate cannabis into our medical system. The first ones. Everybody else kind of kept it separated, but we're the first ones to integrate it into our medical system. So I think we have a really unique opportunity to actually pull the medicinal value out of cannabis in a really unique way. We've got nano-emulsions, you've got different forms like topicals, pessaries, etc. And those could still be under a doctor, because the reality is, and this is what seemed to have happened in Canada from what I've heard, is that everyone started medicating themselves with flower once recreational happened and kind of stopped seeing their doctors. And again, I'm for flower, but I think there are much more direct and efficient ways to treat your conditions, depending on who you are and what you have, than just smoking flower. And so I think it can actually bring the medicinal properties of cannabis to the forefront and actually show people that we're not all just getting high. There are very serious medicinal properties of cannabis. And I think it would be a really intelligent move for the regulators to keep the really medicinal side kind of, especially the high THC stuff, still regulated but accessible, and then allow for the rest of the products to, be accessible to anyone.
I've had this conversation with a couple of people. I think that if we did move towards a recreational adult use kind of market, I would still stay in the medical side. Because
I think I would too.
I feel like, don't get me wrong, I'd love to be able to go down to my corner dispensary and like, oh, what do we got today? Or, I'm going to pick up this, the excitement of it, and the ability to, today I feel like a Granny Smith apple, but tomorrow I feel like a Red Delicious apple, like that is exciting.
Yeah.
But from a therapeutic standpoint, I've by the time this podcast airs, and as long as, knock on wood and keep going with it, I'm 2 years migraine free.
That is so
And
exciting.
so for me,
that's life-changing.
That is
amazing.
Life-changing. And so because of that, I don't want to leave the medical space. I wholeheartedly believe that there are medicinal value there. And I feel like I do need to have that, check in with somebody and let's talk about what did work and what didn't work. And let's try to, craft something more that's going to work for me. I mean,
absolutely.
I say it all the time. I wish I could have a wider variety of nano-emulsions to choose from. I wish I could pick up a CBG one and a CBN one and, shots in my tea at night to make me sleepy and shots in my coffee in the morning to, put an extra pep in my step and, smile on my face. Or, I genuinely wish and hope that we do get to that point eventually.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. I guess what's the biggest pushback when you're talking to doctors? Is it just because it is such a high, is it the THC
it's the high THC content and people are mostly not comfortable with, but also the devices and how do you take it kind of thing. But people need to realize when it comes to concentrates, and again, I used to be this person, but for me personally, I go through a gram cart a week, and when you do the math on it, it's 800 milligrams is your average. That's, 4 grams of a 20% flower. If I'm going through 4 grams of a 20% flower in a week, my doctor's pretty happy with me, right? And that's my experience. Is that I'm sure there's some people who can go through a carton a day if they're sharing or if they're going intensely, but it's not really the norm. The norm is that a cart is going to last you usually about a week. And when you consider how much THC is actually getting consumed over that time, it's not nearly as much as with flower, in my experience. And again, everybody's different. You'll have high consumers and maybe it's not for them. But for me personally, as someone who's just kind of a casual consumer, it's perfect for me. I don't consume nearly as much THC as I used to when I was on flower.
I like it because when you say 4 grams, because to me, I'm like, no. I definitely go through more than that in a week. I mean, I'm somewhere around 7 to 10 grams a week, right? At about a gram and a half a day, give or take. You know, some days it's 2 grams, kind of like because I'm having a bad day or whatever it is. But, you know, for the most part, that's where I sit. I think for me, my big hesitation is I do get headaches with them if I use them too much, which is why which is why I have only had success with the live resin ones. And they're the only ones that haven't given me headaches, but yet they still do if I use too much. And by too much, I literally can't have more than maybe 4 or 5 pulls off of it for the whole day. If I go beyond that, I start to get a bit of a headache. And so I don't know. And that's why I was kind of asking, you know, temperatures and I'm like, am I going too hot with it? Did you have heat settings on your battery? My first battery, shout out to Kind, was the Kind battery, which I think a lot of us had.
And they have multiple heat settings. So if you had it on medium or high, I would expect that kind of result, but I'm not sure. Because mine is always on the low setting. Always.
I want to say it was on the blue setting.
I think the blue was middle.
Maybe that's where I'm going wrong. Maybe I should. And then the one
try it on a lower temperature and see how you go. I'm not guaranteeing you won't get a headache. Everyone's different.
I know I'm not alone because I've had conversations with other people where they said, "Oh, it gave me a headache too," right? And so again, kind of why I was asking: is that a temperature thing? Is that
It could be a terpene thing. I mean, I know if the terpenes go above 10%, I get a headache regardless. And the thing is I think people forget that terpenes are actually very pharmaceutically active. I mean, I was telling you this earlier, that the word terpene is derived from turpentine. So we discovered terpenes because of really harsh chemicals. Limonene is used in most detergents. If you've ever used a detergent with lemon in it, that is limonene, my friends. It's a penetration enhancer. It cleans stuff.
Yeah. Terpinolene is it was used terpene to like take off
to strip paint. Yeah. So while it's in low concentrations for the most part, I think once you start, and it's funny, I hear I've heard companies go 15% terpenes. It's so good, and I'm like, I'm not sure it is. Like, can we actually look at what these do? Because just because it's natural doesn't mean it can't harm you. It's really important that people understand that. And obviously in a concentration of about 5 to 8%, I'm pretty comfortable with, but I did find that whenever I tried extracts that were over that 10%, I was far more likely to get a headache.
Something I'm going to keep in the back of my mind to kind of, because I'll be honest, I am somewhat interested in it. There is that part of me that's like, oh, brave new world, and maybe I should embrace it a little bit more. But like I said at the beginning, very much a flower girl. I like to touch my flower. There's something about it, right? So I don't know. And
I think where concentrates would, probably help you the most, for example, and knock on wood, God bless that you're not getting them at all. But for example, the onset of one, when you can start to feel that migraine coming on, smashing a concentrate is probably the quickest way to potentially mitigate that.
Because I will tell you, when it's really good at fast acting, when I was still having migraines, I still reached for something beyond flower.
Exactly.
Right? I did. I still reached for something stronger. And it's funny that you say that, because when I really stopped to think about it, I did. I reached where I got that migraine. Cannabis helps me manage the triggers that give me a migraine, right? The irritability, the insomnia, all of that overthinking, all of that kind of, I start to grind my teeth, I start to lock my jaw, like all of that sort of triggering stuff. That's what cannabis helps me with.
Yeah.
It, unfortunately, and maybe this is where I need to start dibble dabbling in the concentrates. I tell people all the time, it doesn't. When I get that migraine and I'm in the throes of that migraine, I still reach for pharmaceuticals.
That's it.
I still do.
And that's, I think, the biggest argument for it. It's like the green whistle of cannabis. It's really, really phenomenal at acute onset kind of stuff. And I do believe that it can be used for chronic. I mean, I use my pen chronically all the time. But again, and this is the beauty of extracts, is there's a lot of different types of extracts, and some are going to work well for you. Some might not be for you. Like, for example, I've said I'm a live resin girl, and I stand by that. After trying a couple of other extracts, I like certain extracts for sleep. But what I love about live resin is, for some reason, I'm just so functional on live resin. Even the heavier ones, if I do a low dose of it, I feel great. It helps with, feeling overwhelmed during the day, okay, just go to my vape, have a little bit, move on with my life. And it's very discreet. It's very easy. Most people don't even know it's cannabis. Like there's a lot of benefits to it. So again, it really depends on the person, but I think, and it depends on how you consume it. I think consuming it through a vape cartridge, for example, is not necessarily going to give you the instant relief that I spoke about in my live rosin story. I don't think I would have gotten that intense of pain relief had I not, pulled it through a dab rig, an e-dab rig, a puffco.
So just real quick for listeners who might not know, what is live rosin?
So live is a term used for the input material. So if it's fresh, flash, frozen. So the example I like to give is frozen veggies. They just pull it straight off the stalk and straight into the freezer. And in nutrition school, I learned that they actually have a higher nutritional content than fresh veggies because the nutrients have been locked in. Depends on the nutrients. Exact same goes for cannabis, right? So I know I've seen some outdoor farms where they have a freezer on the outdoor farm so they can pull it off and straight away in the freezer because it's all about timing. And what it does is it really preserves those monoterpenes, it preserves those volatile substances, and it preserves the cannabinoids. So you don't have that 2-week curing process where all these volatiles are actually going to degrade, not in serious numbers, but you get to savor those as well. So then you have rosin or resin. So are we talking rosin or resin?
Tell us both. Because they are slightly different.
They are slightly different. So live resin is a hydrocarbon extraction, and I say live resin is the best one for maintaining the monoterpenes. So I think it's the monoterpenes that I really like about live resin. You tend to get higher percentages there. Live rosin and various input material can be used for live rosin, keef, flour, or bubble hash generally. And what they do is they press it. So imagine like a sandwich press, but at a high temperature. And that's where you see, some people would have seen it, some people wouldn't, where you see this, like it's pressing and it just melts out like honey. It is a gorgeous sight to see, believe me. And some live rosin is hugely dependent on input material. Live resin to a certain degree as well, but I think live rosin is a lot more of a craft product, whereas live resin is a bit more commercial. And live rosin is, for me personally, is closer to flour than live resin.
So rosin is solventless, correct?
Yes, rosin is solventless pressed, and live resin is solvent-based extraction. But what people need to understand is, there's people in the legacy space who are avidly against solvent-based extractions. And in a black market, that's really reasonable. It's super reasonable because I've read studies and adverse reactions to extracts where butane poisoning is a real thing. And that's because in the black market, they're not cleaning it. Whereas in a pharmaceutical product, I really don't think there's much of an argument for the solvent versus solventless because you have to have a clean product. There's COAs and LODs you have to meet. If you have too high pesticides, too high in solvents, or too high in anything, it's not going to pass spec and you're not going to be able to put it on the shelf. And this is what I like about medicinal pharmaceutical markets is it has to be clean. So in a black market space, super reasonable, and the solventless guys who are all about solventless have actually been protecting people by having that narrative, and it's really important. But in a pharmaceutical space, I don't think it holds as much.
On the topic of COAs, what are some of the things that you really kind of look for when you're looking at a COA? Because I'm sure you're looking at things that are very different than what I'm looking at.
Yeah, it depends what you're talking about, like flour or extracts.
Well, I feel like we're on the extracts case.
Yeah,
so
we'll talk extracts.
Let's stick there.
Yeah. So most of the pesticides and residual solvents, I don't tend to look too heavily into it. I will look at them kind of briefly just to see if they're hitting certain amounts. But really, with regulation, the LODs on it it's minimal. So to hit, if you don't pass on those, then you shouldn't be putting the product on the market to begin with. But I mostly look at the major and minor cannabinoid profile and the terpene profile, to be honest with you. If we're talking flour, I'll look at loss on drying to see how dry the product is. So if anybody enjoys looking at COAs for flowers, it's always good to check the loss on dry moisture content for flowers, 10% and above is kind of what you're looking at. If 5 to 10 can kind of be acceptable, but 5 and below usually is that bone dry, turns to dust kind of stuff. Yeah. So I can usually tell whether a product's going to be too dry or, not going to meet my personal specifications before it even hits the boat.
It's hilarious that you say that. I need to start paying closer attention because I definitely know 10% is kind of like a rough ballpark in my mind, right? But I don't actually look at that on the
I
COA.
didn't start doing it until recently, actually, when I started to have to make sure that shipments that were coming in were going to meet spec. Because everyone, nobody likes dry flower, man.
No,
So
it's
if
true.
you're sending me something from Canada and it's at 6%, what do you think it's going to be by the time it hits the shores? I'm just going to get complaints.
It's so true. And like I said, holy crap, that I'm going to ask you here
You
for
can-
like
you can check
a
it.
nugget of information.
Yeah,
but like, I
you can
feel like
tell a lot from
that-
cannabis by the COA, and this is the thing is I can respect people who are about the look and feel, but as someone who got COVID and has had COVID-related anosmia for forever now, I rely on COAs.
I mean, look, I do. I look at the COAs, but that's like what you're saying. That was one of the little lines that I'm not looking at. When I'm looking at a COA, I'm looking at, well, again, the cannabinoids. I'm looking at the terpenes, right? I'm kind of looking like, again, what the makeup is. I guess the like, is it a 2-to-1 to, terpinolene to caryophyllene? Like, what's the, like, that's
And
kind of what I'm
Total
looking.
terpene percentage is a good one.
Yeah, like that's kind of what I'm looking at, but no,
And I always check to the CBG content, whether it be a
I do
flower. I think this is another reason why I really like live resin. You tend to get higher CBG content. And Ethan Russo just published a study that shows, and I know this for a fact because I've experienced it, but it's an anxiolytic, so it reduces anxiety and it actually increases focus. So it helps with memory retention. So I have this theory, and this is a theory, it's not science at this point in time, but in Australia, before there was indica sativa, medical, whatever, there was bush and hydro. So anyone who's from the black market here knows bush and hydro. And essentially that means, was it grown outdoor or was it grown indoor? Kind of, hydro is kind of more hydroponic, chemical based. Anyway, so, and there was always this divide among me and my friends, whether it was, are you a hydro person or are you a bush person? And I was always a bush person. And after looking at quite a few COAs between outdoor flower and indoor flower, I noticed a higher CBG content in the outdoor flower because you can't mimic the sun.
you can't.
And you will get a more rich minor cannabinoid profile from growing outside, which is why outdoor flower is so good for extraction. But yeah, it has that higher CBG content. So I actually check flowers for CBG content because I know from personal experience with myself that a higher CBG content means I'm going to enjoy the flower more.
I'm a big fan of CBG.
Oh, I'm a huge fan. I think it's the next big cannabinoid, if I'm being honest with you. Like, everyone's obsessed with THC, and don't get me wrong, I get it absolutely has its benefits. I'm not against it. But I think people kind of miss the fact that there's 400 different chemicals in the plant, and to say that THC is the reason you love weed, it's misguided, if I'm being honest with you. And I remember the first time I tried my first CBD flower. I don't really smoke CBD flower or inhale it at all because it kind of doesn't have a great taste. If I'm being honest. But I do remember very vividly the first time I had it, I was like, oh my God, this is what I like about cannabis. It's relaxing. I'm not getting a racing heartbeat. I can function. And I just remember having that moment where I'm like, oh, there's a world beyond THC. And you can get therapeutic value out of all these different other cannabinoids, and they're so fun to explore because they all do different things. They're all a family, but all that family has all their different personalities, and it's really fun. And some people have preferences. I know some people love CBC because it feels more stimulating, and like, so I think it's important for people to understand that while THC is great, I think THC is now kind of the older cousin that nobody really, in the medical space, nobody's really paying attention to as much. Like my dream, I'm still begging for this, is my dream would be to have a balanced CBG, THC live resin vape. I have a friend in Canada who said he can do CBG flower into live resin. Mixing that with a THC live, it would be phenomenal. I want to try it so bad.
That would be delicious. I'm thinking about it, right? Because CBG to me is very happy. It's very like,
calming. I remember I had the Medicabolist CBG oil once. I had like 1 or 2 mils because I always go a bit nuts. And I remember I was at a conference and there were people standing around me, and I just remember staring at the wall, and I was in complete bliss. Like, I wasn't high, I wasn't unable to function. I just remember being so calm and so relaxed, and I didn't care what anyone else was saying because I was in my own little nirvana. And it lasted for like maybe a minute, and then I snapped back into conversation. Was like, oh, that was so nice. It's a really cool compound.
I like it to in the morning. I like to make a little sandwich with it with the super silver haze, right? Just a little, and then in the morning it's like that. I mean, I don't do it all the time, but I do it on mornings when I know the rest of the day is going to be chaotic. Right? Like, I know I'm going into a chaotic day. There's nothing I can really do to stop the chaos. So I have to embrace the chaos.
Just got to ride through it.
Exactly. And it's like what you're saying, you know, I'll have that little, whatever, I'm going to tell you straight up, it's my little wake and bake. But
I do
in the course of that wake and bake, I don't want to say it's fleeting, but it is fleeting. And there's that moment where you just kind of sit and you're like, yeah, it's going to be okay. Things are all right. Like you get the big smile on your face and your cheek hurts just a little and you're like, it's okay. CBG's here.
Exactly. Whereas THC makes me all whacked out. My heart's racing. I'm like, oh God, things are going on, you know. And obviously everyone's different, but I think I'm personally a little bit sensitive to THC. Like I do like lower THC products. And to be honest with you, I think what I've been chasing in cannabis this whole time is the CBG and the other cannabinoids and things. So THC obviously is fantastic, especially in lower doses. It's really good at potentiating the effects of the other ones. But I think, you know, I don't know. Yeah, everyone's different.
Everyone's different.
Yeah.
And I think it is great here. And like, again, the differences of where we've come and where we're going, you know, and with the concentrates and again, all the different types of concentrates that are coming out. It's not just one thing.
Yeah.
You know, it is. You can get hash now. You can get the hash ball. You can get the why did I just go for
Diamonds.
Bubble hash.
There you go.
I'm like, you can get the hash ball and you can get, you know, bubble hash and you can get diamonds and you can get diamonds in sauce. Yeah. And it's just like all these things that are now coming out. And I think there are going to be people like you and me that are going to be like, okay, we're going to experiment a little bit and maybe kind of tweak it a little bit more. And then, you know, in a few more months, you'll be like, no, I know I do like that minor cannabinoid. Exactly. This is where I want to be, right?
Yeah.
Because you're consulting. I'm a patient. How do I as a patient, I mean, I guess it's because we do see, obviously there's a push for that high THC and patients are asking for high THC, but how do we change that narrative so that way, you know, the CBG vape that you're talking about actually makes it onto the market, or, you know, again, a CBN vape makes it onto the market? Because I'm willing to bet there are people out there that are hard Topaz fans or hard Royale fans that are like, that's my sleep flower, blah, blah, blah. That if they could get a vape that had CBN and some THC and some CBD in it, I bet you they'd switch, because CBN is very sedating.
That's it. I think people are opting for what they've always had, which is flower, and again, has its purpose for some people. And I'm sure some people are going to try concentrates and be like, nah, flower's for me, and good on you. Godspeed. But I think what really needs to happen, it needs to be education-based, of course, but product companies at the moment, there are some product companies trying to bring out these interesting, you know, vapes and extracts and things like that. But the lack of education and the fact that patients are so focused on THC means that they don't really sell really well. And like every business, if it doesn't sell well, they're not going to keep making it, unfortunately. But then it also comes down to, I think formulation is really important. You've got a lot of people who don't quite understand how important formulating is to the effects that come out on the other side. And you can't just throw one and two things in and just expect it to work. Like, you know, some things in isolate are better in full spectrums, for example, or some things are better paired with other cannabinoids or other terpenes and things like that. And I think seeing some intelligent formulation is what I personally really want to see. Is like, if you're doing a night vape and you're adding CBN in there, let's look at the terpenes that make you sleepy. Let's add more sesquiterpenoids in there because they're known to be a bit more sleepy. Let's actually formulate this in a way where all the compounds make sense, so we're not just throwing, you know, an extract in and hoping it works. And then this will also give people the freedom to go, okay, well, these are the contents of this and it's stable, so I know it's there. Whereas with flower, it's like, yes, you may like that particular terpene, but has that terpene already volatilized and you're not really sure when you're looking at the COA. Whereas with these, you're looking at the COA, you know it's in there, at least within a variation of 5%, which is pretty good. I mean, you know what's going to work. So I think more education on the other cannabinoids and how they feel, and more intelligent formulation so that the ones that do come out really do work for people. Because I guarantee you there's a lot of people in the market who think they are obsessed with THC, but as soon as they try these other really cool products, they would probably switch and be like, oh, okay, there is something else to cannabis than just the THC. This is what's actually helping me. And give people that kind of, a bit more agency over their medicine and really being able to nail down what works for them and what doesn't. You know, if you've got a day vape, adding the more, you know, terpenes that are going to be more stimulating, adding more CBG in there so you get that memory retention and that focus rather than THC. And there's so many smart ways that you can formulate cannabis, but I think what our market is doing at the moment is catering to, you know, what people generally buy. And while that's great, I'm glad that everybody's getting what they want. This is kind of also why I want us to be a more medical market, in the sense that is, why don't you try this? See how you go. If you don't like it, we'll bring back to what you want. But try this.
Try it.
And see how you go. And then people can kind of make that decision. But this is, again, why I think it's important for people to have medical practitioners involved when they're treating themselves with cannabis. And I know that not every practitioner is super educated. That is absolutely an argument. But if you go to a really educated, good cannabis doctor, you will likely get better results than just treating yourself with flower.
It's why I always tell people, journal.
Yeah.
Write it down. Write it down.
Yeah. How did you feel? Like, because even like eating different foods is going to affect how your cannabis metabolizes. You know, what environment you're in is going to affect how your cannabis affects you. You know, this is what I love so much about cannabis is there's so many different variables that so many different things can happen. And it's like some people say cannabis isn't for me when they've only tried it once. And it's like, but what type of cannabis, you know? Whenever people say cannabis doesn't work or cannabis does work, I'm like, that's such a huge name. It's like saying carbohydrates work or carbohydrates don't work, or, you know what I mean? Like, it's such a big, like, thing to say. It's like, it doesn't make any sense.
It's so funny that you say that, because I won't get into it, but Adam Isaac Miller, who was the podcast that will air just before this one, we got off on this whole little tangent about don't knock it till you try it. And I shared how I have this once a philosopher, twice a pervert saying about how, you know, like what you're saying, you know, you try it once because you're a philosopher. How do you know you like it or you don't like it until you try it?
Exactly.
But if you go back, you're a pervert. You liked it. On some level, you liked it. But God bless Adam. He plays me back later on in the episode. He like circles back to it. And he gets me with it. And I'm like, oh, well played, Adam. Well played.
He's a good talker.
Yeah.
He's a good
yeah. But you're right, though. How do you know? Again, the cannabis is very...
It's so huge.
I know
it's
huge.
one plant. I wish we could diversify it a little bit more than that. We all know that all cannabis is not created equal, and there's so many hundreds of variations of it, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, this is part of my issue with the research that I read, is I don't think a lot of the people doing research account for all of those little differences and things like that. And a lot of them are testing black market flower and making claims, or, you know, black market extracts and saying, oh no, people are getting sick from extracts. And it's like, look at the surrounding environment, guys. There's so many different things to consider, and you know, it's hard to make any claim on cannabis. This is definitely this.
I think that's why it takes me so long to write reviews.
Yeah.
Right? Because I sit with it for like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and you know, it's in rotation, out of rotation, in rotation, out of rotation. And it's like, well, did I feel this way because I did? I just talked about it in the review that was just published with it made me feel creative, but then I was like stopping and like, hold on, it's springtime. I'm like, is it just because it's springtime? Because spring makes me feel creative, because I'm looking around at all these flowers and everything out. I'm like, yeah, it puts a pep in my step. And I'm like, is it that, or is it that? You know, and I really had to stop and ask myself, well, no, that I'm sure is contributing to it on some level, but there was a common theme there that I noticed. I consumed this flower, and then later on in the day, I was doing something creative.
Yeah.
So, but it took me a while to put those dots together. It's the same with getting the munchies. Right?
Sometimes you're just hungry.
Yeah. When I talk,
you haven't eaten enough that day, and then weed just reminds you that you're actually hungry.
Exactly. Well, because I talk to people all the time, and they're like, oh, you know, it gives me the munchies. And I'm like, does it though?
Are you just not eating enough, and your body's reminding you that you need to eat?
Like, what did you have to eat today?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, because a lot of people are living on coffee.
Yeah, like I'm guilty of it.
Oh, me too.
I'll have coffee in the morning and then go like all day.
Yeah,
and then it's
2
dinner.
o'clock. Oh, I haven't eaten anything. No, maybe have another coffee.
Yeah. And so it is you've got to stop and ask yourself, well, am I actually hungry because I'm ravenous with the munchies because that's what this flower is doing, or am I hungry because I've literally had an apple and a glass of water today?
Yeah, and taking the cannabis is just reminding me.
And yeah, it's just kind of clued me back into that feeling of
Just making, present in your body means that all of a sudden you're feeling all the things you've been ignoring.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's wild like that. Sometimes it really is. Where do you think the industry is going in the next few years?
To be honest, it's a big wait and see at the moment. I couldn't probably say anything for sure. It does definitely seem like this year the regulators have been watching a lot more. We've definitely seen some action, but if you want my personal opinion, I don't think we've seen anything yet. Some of the practices that are done in this industry, unfortunately, and it really sucks because it gives cannabis a bad name, are basically a play-by-play from the opioid epidemic playbook, to be honest with you, paying doctors, having single medicine clinics, not talking to other practitioners, et cetera, et cetera. And again, I'm all for the people getting their weed. I'm not against that. But when you consider the fact that we have integrated this into our medical system, I want you to consider, would you be happy with a pharmaceutical company acting this way? Are you just okay with it because it's cannabis?
Yeah.
And is that a double standard that we're then creating? Because as safe as cannabis is, I'm not for doctors getting paid to write scripts. I'm not for, clinics only looking after one aspect, having 5-minute consults with patients with really serious and complex conditions and going, hey, why don't you try this? When, again, the doctor isn't necessarily as educated in plant science and cannabis to be able to really help that person. So I think to a certain degree, that's going to start getting looked at. And I promise you the regulators are not happy with the fact that that's happened, because it makes a joke of the system that they've created. And it means it means the pharmaceutical companies can look at cannabis and go, why can't we do that? Why can't we pay off doctors and et cetera, et cetera? So I think we're going to start seeing a pullback. I mean, some people are already seeing it with, limit of 4 inhalation scripts and et cetera, et cetera. But I can't say in the next 5 years. I think at some point we will go into adult use, but I think people are misguided in saying that was the whole purpose in us becoming medical to begin with. I don't think that was our intention when we first signed off on it. I think the TGA thought it would be a lot smaller than it became. And now they've got this big problem to deal with, and whether they filter some into adult use to ease the burden on them and keep certain things, within the medical sphere, I think that's a very big possibility. But I also know there's still a lot of stigma. We all saw the ABC article from earlier this year talking about people with psychosis and hospitals and things like that. So when you consider that, we have to remember that adult use is further away every time we see, people going to hospital with psychosis diagnoses that doctors can relate to cannabis. But, I'll also admit that some doctors are just really biased in the way that they diagnose things. For example, I read an article from back in February in The Guardian where a doctor had an inquiry into a patient of his that died. It was an Aboriginal man who came into hospital. He had really bad stomach issues. I think he was vomiting a lot, basically was diagnosed with cannabis hyperemesis syndrome. Turns out he had a peptic ulcer, and that then not exploded. That's not the medical term for it, but you know what I mean? Yeah,
ruptured.
That then burst, ruptured. Yes, there we go. And he died. And this was because the doctor didn't even look at him physically. So to a degree, I think there is definitely doctors going, oh, this is just cannabis, because it's easier to do that than to actually look into this patient's issues. But at the same time, while doctors are seeing those statistics and while people are seeing those adverse reactions and while they're seeing, doctors getting paid to write 15 scripts at 120 grams a month or whatever, it's going to be hard to convince the government that this is something we should do.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I mean, on some level, I feel like, of course, we're seeing more psychosis because you have these clinics where doctors are only talking to people for 5 minutes, and there's no way in hell you got my medical history.
That is not okay.
There's no way you got my full medical history in 5 minutes. No way. So of course I'm slipping through the cracks because you didn't ask me about my mental health. Well, guess what? I've got, whatever cousin that's got this bipolar or whatever it is, right? Like, so I probably shouldn't have been prescribed in the first place. But I was, because somebody didn't do their due diligence at the beginning, right? And so now I'm in the hospital and I'm having a psychotic break. Yeah. And then, like you're saying, the ABC has picked it up and run with it. Yeah. So it's a double-edged sword in that sense.
And it frustrates me a lot because it's a standard that never should have been set. I mean, there's a lot of patients who are affected by this now, and they're like, now my medication is coming down, I'm getting cut off, and they're not being tapered down, they're just being cut off to protect the doctor's license. And I don't think that's cool. You as the doctor set that standard, at least work with them to taper it down rather than just booting them out and putting them in the too hard basket. You shouldn't have allowed them in to begin with.
Exactly.
And I think that's where the most egregious part of the way that we've been acting is, you know, you've got people who it was legitimately helping, and yes, they may have some backgrounds and they need to be managed in a certain way, but it was legitimately helping them. And now you're just like, oh, no, sorry, my license is at risk. Your health doesn't matter to me anymore. That's not okay. It's a real problem.
No, I'm 100% with you. Like, there definitely needed to be due diligence done there to handle those people as we were. Like, yeah, it's crazy when you start standing back, and there were a lot of people that, you know, are saying, hey, you know, I'm in a better place here, but now I've been cut off. Yeah. Or I've gone from a place where I'm happy and I can manage things, but then, or my favorite was they didn't even know, like, they had, like, how much they had. Like, they were allowed to have, say, 90 grams a month, and they got dropped down to 60, but didn't even know.
Yeah, that one's not cool. Not communicating.
They didn't know until they went to go get their next script and read the label, and the label had been changed, and they were like, wait a second, my label says 60, and I've always been 90. The pharmacy must have, the pharmacy put the label on it that the doctor wrote the script from, right? Like, again, look, straight up, I'm not opposed to kickbacks, but how about instead of paying the doctors to write the scripts, you put the money into, like, the CAMPUS program, the Compassionate Access program. Yeah. Put money there so that way patients who can't afford it can access it. Absolutely. I think that's a way better place to put your money, as opposed to putting it into a doctor's pocket. Yeah. But, you know, absolutely. Who am I? Just a lonely patient giving my opinions.
Look, as much as we've been bashing the industry and doctors, I just like to make it very clear, there are very good people in this industry. There are very good doctors. And there are people who have been trying to do the right thing from the get-go and have not been setting these standards. But obviously a couple of bad apples have really made the regulators look at us and look at us poorly. And it frustrates me, you know. I want the cannabis conversation to move forward. I don't want us to go backwards. I don't want us to have to, you know, cap limits and blah, blah, blah. I want us to move the conversation forwards. But unfortunately, while people aren't respecting the system that it's currently in, that pushes us back.
It does.
I understand that you want to have fun with cannabis and you want to do your legacy stuff, and I completely am fine with that. But what I'm not fine with is when the regulator looks at that and thinks that you're making a joke out of the pharmaceutical industry and then goes, maybe cannabis isn't a medicine. You know what I mean? So, you know, we got cannabis legalized under the guise for epileptic children, for cancer patients, for people who desperately needed it. And I find that some of those people are being left behind in favor of recreational patients who spend more money. And it just really makes me sad, to be honest with you. I'm okay. Again, I will fight at rallies. I will go out and march for anyone to keep them out of prison for cannabis. I don't think anyone should ever go to prison for cannabis. But I prioritize truly medical patients who are suffering over people who just want to smoke weed. Again, all power to you, but I'm worried about the people who are suffering and the you know, and being able to change their lives and increase their quality of life over just someone who just wants to, you know, relax and smoke weed.
I'm with you completely, because it is. That's what it was brought into. That was
the whole premise of us being able to have it.
Yep, it really was.
And I don't want those people to be left behind and go back to the pharmaceutical industry, which has happened before, because they're like, well, cannabis doesn't work because they tried some cheap oil that was never going to work to begin with.
Yeah, I'm with you. We're going places, and for the most part, it is positive places, but it is frustrating every now and then when we hit a big speed bump.
Yeah. Look, I think the regulation thing, while there will be definitely bad aspects to it, I think it will also encourage more innovation in minor cannabinoids and things like that. And that's where I kind of want to come in with my education and consulting. Is anybody who'll listen to me, I'm going to scream at you about the fact that, you know, the entourage effect, minor cannabinoids, terpenes are going to reduce the negative side effects of THC. So if you're concerned about THC, there is so much science to show you that if you just up those other compounds, you're actually going to see a great benefit to your patient, and it's really, really important. So that's what I'm trying to get out there, is we don't need to necessarily reduce THC. We need to increase our awareness of other minor cannabinoids and terpenes that reduce the adverse events of THC.
I like it, Liz. I like it a lot. I feel like we've covered a lot of things.
I feel like we have.
And now I'm going to ask you to narrow it down and give me one call of action, one nugget of information, something that you want the listeners to resonate with them.
Yeah. Wow, that's pretty difficult based on everything.
I know, like I said, we have been all over the place, and I feel like we've had some fabulous conversations.
Absolutely, it's been phenomenal. Look, I think just exploring those other products, let's encourage these companies to actually release the products that are going to feel good and aren't just flour or aren't just cheap, crappy products that just to move. Let's encourage them to, where's the CBG, where's the CBN, what's the terpene profile look like, what's the percentage of terpenes, and really giving them like the education to be able to look at a product and go, I'm into this product. I mean, that's what I'm trying to do with doctors at the moment, is really give people the knowledge to look at a product and ask product companies or ask their doctors, but what about this? Have you thought about this? Things like that. Like I really want people to encourage product companies to get more innovative and to stop doing the same thing over and over and over again. We've seen a CBD 100 oil 100 times. There are variations that are better than others, and this is what I mean about formulations.
Mm-hmm.
But there's so much more we can do, guys. There's topicals, there's pessaries, there's so many avenues that we can look down that are going to be medicinal. So
Bath bombs. I don't know why we can't get bath bombs. I see some of my girlfriends in Canada, and they're like having a horrible period, tossing in the bath bomb. Life is good. And I'm like, for the love of God, why can't I get a bath bomb?
and that's a medical product as far as I'm concerned.
It is. If I'm having a bad period and I'm having some really bad cramps and I'm going to sit in a hot bubble bath that has a therapeutic bath, come on.
Absolutely.
Put some lavender in it. All in a day.
Absolutely. Yeah. So vote with your money is I guess my best way to say it, is encourage these companies to do better and to have better products. And if it's a low quality product, don't accept a low quality product. This is medicine. This is not a recreational market. You're allowed to have standards.
I love it, Liz. Thank you so much for coming to talk to me, to coming up here to Toowoomba during the Carnival of Flowers. Right? Like, there's been a little bit of ambiance. We got the obnoxious bird, and we had a few people walking by. But you know what? We're out in nature.
Yeah.
Talking about
we've got the terpenes rolling,
they're
forest bathing and all that.
Yeah, honestly, I couldn't have thought of a better place to have a conversation about plants,
About weed.
Yeah, I love it. In the gardens.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks again, Liz.
All right.
And that's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Liz just as much as I did. We covered so much today, from the complexities of cannabis medicine to the value of concentrates and everything in between. As always, friends, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to listen. I truly appreciate each and every one of you for being a part of the AusCanna community. Don't forget to send in your rapid fire questions for a chance to win an exclusive sticker pack. And of course, if you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star review or share it with a friend who might find it helpful. Until we meet again, friends, remember, don't hate, educate.